There has been some quite odd goings-on recently when it comes to what it means to be a British nationalist. Now, for those of you that follow this channel, you will know that I am a civic nationalist. You will know that I am rather apathetic about race. People who scream at me and call me a race traitor, I pay no mind to, just as I take no mind when I am called a racist by the left. However, that doesn't mean that I do have some questions to ask the civil service, such as questions on demographics. Because believe it or not, I think what has happened to Britain in terms of demographics over the past 2 decades is rather unnatural. And recently, that made quite a few ethno-nats follow me, which is fine. They got quite angry at me in one particular video when I talked about Ash Sarkar. I said in that video, I do not care if Britain is 100% black, as long as the culture is still British. They didn't take this very well. So all 10 of them decided to unsubscribe from me and tell me they were doing so in the comments. Which, again, is fine. People are free to subscribe and unsubscribe from me at their own whim. However, it got me thinking, why do so many British nationalists, quote-unquote, care so much about race? And then I came across this live stream with Mark Collett. Just take a look at this.
Never be black-pilled, Ed. Did you see Richard Inman's pathetic rant against ethno-nationalism? We must stop the enemies of the UK masquerading as patriots to push their neo-Nazi agenda. And the motto of the story is, Richard, you're on the wrong side. Because if you stand for us, the indigenous people of Britain, being turned into a minority so that you can bring in wonderful people who will, of course, just adopt our culture and be just like us, because after all, it's only skin deep, isn't it, mate? You're on the wrong side.
Now, you see, I actually watched the Richard Inman video that he's talking about, and I actually largely agree with it, because of course I do, I'm a civ-nat. However, these Whignats are really not being fair about what he actually said. He basically just doesn't want a fascist ethno-state in Britain, which I completely agree with. But he also says how people who tended to be more for the civ-nat patriot side of the British nationalism, he says the low IQ type people, or the outright dishonest people, go straight over and follow Patriotic Alternative, which, if you're about to hear clips as to why I really do not like them, mainly because Mark Collett, I mean, for God's sake, let's just look at this picture of Mark Collett with a woman who has a goddamn swastika on her tit. I mean, does this scream British nationalist to you? Or does it scream a man who wants to import a foreign ideology that completely tore up Europe throughout the 20th century? Because that's all you're going to get when you get fascism. It's never succeeded. It's never even lasted 2 decades. And that's what you want to import? Give me a break. But anyway, back to my point. That Richard Inman video, I totally agree with it, and I think you should watch it too. Link in the description as usual. But obviously, Mark Collett goes on to say, no, I am the one true British patriot. Only my British nationalism will save Britain. I mean, let's see what he has to say.
We will not be replaced, and if you're on the side that wants us to be replaced, you are an enemy of the indigenous people. This is no longer the time of the little plastic flag waving conservatives. This is the time of the nationalists, the people who want to save those of European descent.
Oh, are we going from British descent to European descent, are we? Oh, is this now a Pan-European movement? I'm sorry, I thought you were a British nationalist, not a Pan-European nationalist. You absolute dishonest hack.
Chris from Patriotic talks. I'm on with him tomorrow at 7:30 UK time. I'll be reminding you that at the end. James Goddard. Look at all the people who've come over. Shazia Hobbs.
Oh my god, you're celebrating getting James Goddard over. You're seriously happy you got a fucking nobody who called Anna Soubry a Nazi over to your cause. Jesus Christ. It's hardly a Nigel Farage, is it? Although you call him a cuck recently, to be fair. It's no one who's actually got some political swing. No one who's actually going to make a massive difference, is it, for God's sake? And no one in their right mind that you should want on your side is going to say exactly what Mark Collett is about to say. And quick reminder, Mark Collett is the true British patriot. So let's see which philosophers he thinks should influence his Pan-European empire. Oh, God.
Matt V said to all 3 of us, if you could only preserve one book for the future white generations, which one would you choose? I'll go first because this is a real struggle for me. It's a real struggle of mine to choose a book that I would like to preserve. Because on one hand, I would obviously like to pick my own, but on the other hand, that looks pretty sort of big-headed. I'd say out of all the books that I've read, there's 3 books. One by a certain misunderstood Austrian painter, that is rather marvellous. One by George Lincoln Rockwell, that if I probably say on this show, it'll be banned. And Dr. David Duke's My Awakening.
The misunderstood Austrian painter who wrote a marvellous book. Thankfully, because I like to understand my enemy, I have a copy of Mein Kampf here, and I'm going to read out some things that apparently Mark Collett wants future generations to be influenced by. So at the risk of getting my channel shut down for hate speech, I'm going to read out an excerpt. So, the nationalisation of the masses can be successfully achieved only if, in the positive struggle to win the soul of the people, those who spread the international poison among them are exterminated. For those of you that don't understand, that is Hitler saying that you need to exterminate the quote-unquote international poison, which if you read the rest of the book is basically how he refers to the Jews. So that's lovely, Mark Collett. You think this book should be preserved? The one that advocates the extermination of a peoples. Great. That's really going to win the heart and soul of the British people, you absolute buffoon. Let's have a read of another little excerpt. So, at the beginning of the war, or even during the war, if 12 or 15,000 of these Jews who were corrupting the nation had been forced to submit to poison gas, just as hundreds of thousands of our best German workers from every social stratum and from every trade and calling had to face it in the field, then the millions of sacrifices made at the front would not have been in vain. To put that in simple English, sacrificing of the Jews, good. Sacrificing of the German people, bad. And this is exactly the type of thing that apparently Mark Collett wants his future generations to read. Why do you want that, Mark? Are you after a genocide? Is all this talk of demographics leading you down this road? You see, I'm taking the radical centrist position of saying no war was necessary at all for World War I and II, and the sacrifice of no one was needed. Every sacrifice was in vain, whether they be German, English, French, or Jewish. But no, let's just tell future generations that the best books they can read are by literally 3 Nazis, by the way. Yeah, that is really how you speak to the heart and minds of the British people. Now, naturally, because I'm not an idiot and I want the term British Nationalist to not be conflated with people like Mark Collett, I went to Twitter with this video, and I got some interesting responses. And there's also been a lot of talk about Patriotic Alternative this week as well. So me and a good friend, Gammonista Worshipper as he goes on Twitter, have been having a few Twitter conversations with people from Patriotic Alternative. So we'll go through Laura Towler's arguments first. So she says on Twitter, "This is our approach. We're not playing that game with the media. It's not like they're ever going to say, oh, actually, you seem nice, let's stop smearing you now." And some account called Kirk Nordstrom says, "But they're not smears, are they? You actually are a bunch of white nationalists, neo-Nazis and third positionists." To which Laura says, "Are nationalists only scary if they're white? What's wrong with being a nationalist?" To which Kirk then says, "So you're admitting you're a white nationalist? There's nothing wrong with being a nationalist. I am a nationalist, but I don't base it on racialism. I oppose white nationalism, black nationalism, and any other form of racial nationalism." To which Laura says, "You're not a nationalist. A nation is a people. What do you think you're trying to protect? Let me guess. Flimsy values that some government think tank thought up." My lord. No, Laura, what I am trying to protect is the classical British way of life. I would like to protect classic British architecture. I want less of the postmodern and modern architecture we are seeing nowadays, because quite frankly it is incredibly ugly. I want to protect the British way of life, which, believe it or not, doesn't involve actually being white. I mean, for the love of God, look at this picture. Tell me which one looks more like a British nationalist to you. Is it the guy begging to stay in the overbearing European Union? Or is it the black guy, the guy dressed up in British flags, the guy who clearly wants Britain to be an independent and successful nation? You tell me that, and I tell you what, I will take thousands upon thousands of people like that black guy than any of you with your patriotic alternative bullshit, let me tell you. Anyway, back to the Laura Towler argument. So my good friend Gammon Easter Worshipper says, are you suggesting English Christian values and customs and social norms, which has developed naturally over time and passed on generationally, were thought up from a government think tank? To which Laura replies, I'm suggesting that the extent of Kirk's nationalism is some flimsy values which have been attached to every white country, and they're not organic. She hates her country. She doesn't understand her own country's history. Then another friend of mine, Unca Representative, chimes in, are Spencer's Pan-Europeanism, National Socialism, Rockwell's philosophy natural to British people, Laura, or are they foreign? To which Laura says, I advocate for a people, not a system of government. The people is the one thing that's been consistent, while a system of government can change. You're asking me to question which are nothing to do with anything I've ever said. To which Gammon Easter Worshipper says, how can you say you don't advocate for a system of government? You've advocated for fascism, which requires a dictatorship, hence a system of government, and you are setting up a political party. To which Laura stupidly says back, very easily because it's true, I was trying to install a fascist government. Wouldn't PA be a fascist party with a fascist manifesto? Your leader is saying we should all read, and every future generation should read, literally the Nazi manifesto. That's what Mein Kampf is. The second volume of Mein Kampf is exactly how a government should be run for the people of Germany if they wanted National Socialism. Are you mental? Are you actually mental, Laura? So given it's a smear to call these people neo-Nazis, despite being A-OK and thinking that every future generation should be inspired and read Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, which, by the way, the second volume, as I just mentioned, is a manifesto for the National Socialist movement, it's apparently a fucking smear to call these people neo-Nazis and white nationalists, despite saying, oh, your type of nationalism for your flimsy values? I don't care about that. I want white nationalism. Oh, no. I'm sorry, your flimsy values? No, everyone should read Mein Kampf. That's a strong man's book. Give over yourself. You are a bunch of neo-Nazis. And that's me saying it. I don't throw out the term neo-Nazi often. But if you don't want to get called a neo-Nazi, don't act like one. As the old saying goes, if it walks like a duck, and it talks like a duck, and it goose-steps like a Nazi, it's probably a Nazi duck. Anyway, here are a few other Twitter spats. We've got one on the subject of why it doesn't matter that Mark Collett is a neo-Nazi. So a random Twitter user says, I really couldn't care less. I listen to what people say, and if they speak the truth, I can appreciate it. Mark Collett has been speaking a lot of truths that few others can voice the concerns of Europeans that do not wish to become a minority in their own lands like Mark does. And so Gammon Easter Worshipper says back, you should care, as people who claim to be British patriots are, in fact, simping for a foreign ideology and are doing nothing to cause any good. To which Barry Botter says back, patriotism/nationalism also didn't originate from Britain, so that's quite a silly argument to make. It's the old classic. It's the old classic leftist line. Tea isn't British because it comes from India or China. No, that's not how it works. But anyway, he carries on. It's not about the origins of a certain ideology. It's about what's necessary or what's best for the good of the people. If the ideology originated from Zimbabwe, so be it. British nationalists, everyone. Now, you see, the problem with this is, okay, democracy comes from Greece. You know, a lot of different parts of our British way of life come from different places. That's fine. Doesn't matter. Point being, though, that we have had generally a Lockean way of life and a Lockean government since the Bill of Rights was written in 1688, where basically everyone had natural rights, and from there, everyone was equal under the law. Well, in the first place, it was Protestants, but then they eventually made amendments to apply it to everybody. That is the British way of life. That is what the British people generally want. Well, not recently, but we've all been gaslighted by the left. Again, everyone should read Abolition of Britain by Peter Hitchens. But generally, there was law and order throughout the British Isles. Britain was generally, as these white nationalists say, a white country. Which, believe it or not, although I say I'm completely apathetic to race, I did mention that mass migration has unnaturally changed our demographics. I do think it's odd that we are less than 90% white in this country. However, the issue has been is that we have not been following the Lockean principles. People like rape gangs have got away with raping kids for far too long. We have allowed Marxists into all our institutions, and they are completely trying to change the law and the way of life. Hence we now have hate speech laws, which you would never ever have seen if the Bill of Rights was properly maintained. And so what do I want as a British nationalist? I want to turn back the clock, basically. I want everything that has gone wrong since the 50s to be reverted to a way where we will now have a modern British Lockean liberal government and way of life. I do not want to emulate Mein Kampf for the fucking British Isles to then have a pan-European state, because I hate the French more than any other nation. I do not want to be put under the same umbrella as the French. That is part of British nationalism. Obviously, that part is a meme, but the British are really, really different to the continent. We have completely different sets of philosophies, and that is basically why Britain was the greatest empire for so long, and it's why Germany couldn't keep an empire for more than 20 years. Anyway, on to another Twitter conversation, this one with another full-on British nationalist. So he says, I seem to have a problem with Mark Collett choosing foreign ideologies. What if he chose someone like Carlyle, who was, quite frankly, very much on the white nationalist side? So I said, that would have been better than Hitler and the Nazi leaders, yes. It's still not ideal, though. Why not choose British philosophers that we based our British culture and way of governance of, like Locke, Burke, Hume, or Bertrand Russell? To which I was told, why would we choose those guys? Their critique of society is totally irrelevant in solving the issues we currently face, and are partly the reason we're failing now. Our issues are centred around demographics, neoliberalism, and globalism. The thinkers I listed are valuable in critiquing those kinds of subjects. Right, but to which I then said, no they're not, because their end goals absolutely flatten their own countries and cause mass genocide. To which for some goddamn reason he thought it was clever to say, which of those thinkers I listed believes in genocide? Ignoring the fact that Hitler oversaw one of the most famous genocides in history, and to which he also says, and tell me which of their ideas would flatten the country. And again, Mein Kampf advocated a Nazi society which only lasted 20 years. I was talking to this guy for quite some time over the past few days, and so quite clearly there he said, no, the Nazi state was fine, Hitler didn't do nothing. Did Hitler really want a genocide? Well, despite the extracts from Mein Kampf that I read before, the Holocaust also happened. Which, by the way, quite a lot of them deny, but that's a whole different issue that I just can't be bothered getting into. But back on point, I managed to get to this conversation as well with the same guy. So he says, what kind of conversation is going to save Britain? Talking about the need for Muslims to be more liberal, discussing the issues with identity politics. You have absolutely no clue how to help this country. And so I said, all you can do is shill for Hitler and his failed states. I'll take my chances with the ideology that doesn't commit genocides, thanks. To which he said, where have I done that? And to those of you watching this video, you saw exactly where he just did that. To which I then reply, you know, you say Nazis had a successful state and didn't do nothing. Fuck British philosophy and civ-nats, lol. Britain wants to follow Mein Kampf. To which then he has just said there, where have I shilled for Hitler? To which he then says to me, I've never said any of those things, and you're acting erratic and delusional. I said we should learn from continental philosophy, which obviously he didn't, and I tried to see how much you actually know about fascism by engaging you in friendly debate. Well, the fact is that you have been totally dishonest for me for the last 3 days. I can't even be bothered to check up your name again, it's right on the screen. But you have been totally dishonest. You'll say, you'll defend Hitler for 3 days straight, and then say that you don't defend Hitler. You will defend the fascist state for 3 days straight, and then say you don't defend fascist states. And then, after defending all of this shit, you'll say that Mark Collett is reasonable for simping for Hitler and other Nazis, but you will also say that you're not simping for Hitler and other Nazis. I don't get it. Why can't you just be honest? Just, like, call yourself what you are. You actually really go out your way to not call a spade, and it's very frustrating for me for 2 reasons. 1, I can't have an honest conversation with you, and 2, you're tarnishing the name nationalist, which is why I've had to make this video to say British nationalism is all about British culture. And if you care so much about the white race, get yourself a white wife and start having white babies. But you don't do that, you just bitch about the government. All while saying, oh, we don't really care about having a fascist system. Then why do you keep advocating fascist systems and wanting the government to be yeeted? I want the government yeeted, and I've told you exactly why. Because the law and order is not being applied equally and not in a classic British manner. But you're complaining because there are too many brown people in the country. Which one do you think's really going to be more reasonable for the average British person? Saying, yeah, the law isn't being applied equally and it usually has done in this country. Or saying, now we need more white people? Well, I guess we have the answer to that, because you're still a fringe movement who everyone thinks is just full of retards. But I mean, for God's sake, all these people have is just that it's a smear tactic. They can't actually say yes or no to simple questions that Gamonista worshipper asks. So, here's an example. Are you denying Mark Collett is a neo-Nazi? Because if he isn't, then what would one have to do to be correctly labelled a neo-Nazi? Because they do exist, of course, in small numbers, but they do exist. To which someone replies, drop the leftist smear terminology, you would qualify as a neo-Nazi in opinion of some groups. Orban and Salvini are called fascist and racist by left and globalists. Patriots should stop using communist slurs. To which Gamonista Rosper says, some literally are neo-Nazis. Are you a fan of National Socialism? To which he replies, at this point, who care? How hard is it to say, no, I'm not a fan of National Socialism. No, I'm not a neo-Nazi, obviously. And then when pushed on it, you say, oh, do you like Hitler? You say no, obviously. You're a British nationalist. We fought a goddamn war against an enemy of the state. And now you want to bring his ideas back. We didn't hate him because he was Hitler. We hated him because he had an expansionist empire that was trying to take over Europe and was being incredibly immoral. So Gamonista Worshipper says yes or no, because the previous tweet suggested it was a smear. Let's see if it is a smear or not. And then they don't answer, because none of them want to answer. Because, believe it or not, they all understand that calling yourself a Nazi is bad for optics. But they don't care that actually following Nazi ideology and trying to say you should be influenced by Hitler isn't bad optics. And I've got the clip, like it was at the beginning of the video. I mean, are you seriously going to tell me that it is a smear to call him a neo-Nazi when he said that? I don't know how many times I have to repeat myself, but it just doesn't seem to be getting into these people's heads. Anyway, I think I've made all my points for today, because seriously, how much more do I need to go through? What more do I need to bring out to make it obvious that Patriotic Alternative is for people who are either incredibly unintelligent and don't understand philosophy very well, or for people who understand the ideology of the Nazis but don't want to call themselves Nazis because they understand that optics matter. I mean, for God's sake, these people celebrated James Goddard going over to them. James Goddard, a nobody who called fucking Anna Soubry a Nazi and got in jail because of it. Like, my God, the guy's clearly not that intelligent. And you're telling me that's a success. You should be embarrassed. So anyway, I may as well explain how you should be a British nationalist. And I'm going to personally answer the question that Mark Collett was asked. So what book would I preserve for the future generations? And I'm not going to say white generations, I'm going to say British generations. And that book is obviously John Locke's Two Treatises of Government, because it is the very building blocks upon which this country has been running for 3 centuries and more. It has the basis in Christianity that Britain was built upon. It is the building block upon which common law was derived, and it explains incredibly well how natural laws are derived from God and nature. And if you're an atheist, you can just say that they are derived from nature. The point being, with this book influencing every British person from this point forward, you would have a government that worked incredibly well for the 3 centuries we had them since 1688. The reason things have got screwed up now is because we have Marxists in all our institutions and a lazy civil service that basically just want the easy way out of everything. But as John Locke's Two Treatises of Government show, life is suffering. He does acknowledge that. And he also says that to survive you have to put hard work in. And that is not the ethic that the British people are currently living under at the moment, because of our massive welfare state, because of our hate speech laws, because of the slow erosion of the British way of life that has been done by Marxists. Because ultimately, that's all it means to be British. You have a stiff upper lip, you work hard with a good work ethic, you live and let live, and most importantly of all, you have a deep suspicion for everything that goes on in the continent and all the philosophy that comes from there. Because ultimately Britain was the greatest empire in the world because it protected property rights and it wasn't too influenced by the continental philosophies that people like Mark Collett seem to want all of us to be influenced by. But anyway, that's absolutely everything I had to say on the subject for today. But there's just a couple more things. Number one, Sarah, man, you've gone down the rabbit hole, so to speak. We need you back, lass. It's not a good route you're going down. I've seen your video praising Rockwell, and you seem to be not really challenging Collett on all his pro-fasci, pro-Nazi, anti-British sentiment. I have to say I'm disappointed, but I do hope that you are still sensible. And of course, I'm always happy to chat and get you on laughing at The Guardian. And finally, I would like to thank Easter Gammon Worshipper, my friend on Twitter, everyone should go follow him, for helping me out with arguing with the Nazis and getting some sweet content in for this video. But, as usual, thank you very much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.